Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I head out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Thanks for joining me on my walk today. It is a sunny, chilly day here in suburban Chicago. I'm glad to be talking with you. In fact, I was looking forward to doing this podcast because I wanted to go on a walk, but I also was really looking forward to connecting with you. That said, I didn't have anything specific in mind, and I realized it's probably been long enough that I felt okay going back to the well and doing an episode that I really enjoy, but I've never gotten any feedback on, so it's possible this is the least favorite episode format. Yeah, it's The Geek Asks. For those of you who are new to the podcast, The Geek Asks is a format where I imagine, in a sort of my brother and me art advice style, that the topics being posted on Board Game Geek are not, in fact, general forum discussion posts, but rather are individual advice questions being asked of me. So what I do is I open up Board Game Geek while I'm walking, I look at the recent forum posts, and I just read the subject line, and then I answer the question off the top of my head based on that. If it doesn't seem like it's a question that is worth asking or answering, I just skip over it. This is not a very serious or well thought out kind of episode, but for some reason I really enjoy it. Hopefully you do too, and I can be amusing. So let's just jump right in. Our first topic at the top of the page, noob here, never owned board games, exclamation point. Well, welcome, noob. You know, it's interesting. The term noob, which people often use to describe a new person, was originally an insult. It wasn't just meant to describe a new person. It was meant to describe an incompetent new person, right? It's spelled N-O-O-B because it is suggesting that person is a boob, as well as a newbie, right? Newbie, N-E-W-B-I-E, was the original use of that word, which focused more on just a person who is new to a thing. And then at some point, gamers started describing people who are incompetent as new players, but also boobs, so noobs. I suspect the first person to type that just typed it because they didn't know how to spell N-E-W-B-I-E or didn't care, rather than that they were proposing a complex etymological significance. But I like to think that's there. Where to get blank/plain board game boxes of the standard sizes. There is no board game standard size, despite what Blue Peg Pink Peg will tell you. If you wanted to try, there is not a place to get blank ones. You might be able to order unprinted board game boxes from the Game Crafter, but the Game Crafter doesn't sell specifically standard sizes in the same sizes that other games are. If you were trying to acquire board game boxes of specific sizes for testing or whatever, what you should do is go to Goodwill with a ruler or a tape measure. A few visits to Goodwill will get you boxes in all sorts of different shapes and sizes if you have any kind of significant Goodwill available to you. So that's where to get those. Go to Goodwill. Question about trading and wants. I've found trading on Board Game Geek to be frustrating because basically any game I trade, I have to pay $15 for the privilege of trading, which means I'm giving away a game and paying $15 because that's about how much it costs to ship any big game. So instead, I prefer to do local sales. Even if I take a poor price for it, say $10, that's $10 I gained rather than $15 I spent. Unless you can do a math trade, an in-person math trade, which are awesome. But I can't do that. I've only done that a couple times, and I can't do that here because, COVID. All right. How to neatly design a character sheet where the maximum HP changes as the game goes on. There's not a neat way to do it. I mean, Dungeons & Dragons has the best answer, which is you have a character sheet you fill out with a pencil, and you erase the entry and rewrite the new entry when your HP changes. I don't think there's another way to do it, unless you were doing something with stickers. But even then, I don't know how that would work. Let's see. Do you own board game shirts? I have a couple. I have 3 shirts from my board game club, which maybe isn't board game shirts, but it says Toggle Gaming on them. I have the regular straight up green and black Toggle Gaming shirt. I have the one that we made for Pride, which is the same Toggle Gaming logo, but written in rainbow colors. And then I have the old Toggle Gaming drink up shirt, which says drop in drink up, play on. I like all three. My favorite is the original, though, the green one, the green and black. It's just nice. I also have one shirt from supporting Tabletop Season 3. I don't have other board game shirts, although it would be fun to have. I think it'd be fun to have one that's kind of obscure, where people who know board games would recognize it, but people who don't would not. Like something with part of the cover of Scythe on it, or something like that. I like the obscure board game posters, for example. Okay, what retailers besides Amazon ship internationally? No idea. Do you make t-shirts for game nights? Yes. Do you need to master in order to enjoy? Ooh, that's a good one. I've often talked about how I am a gamer who prefers breadth over depth, although I really do like getting to know a game well enough to be good at it and to really understand it well. As you know from listening to the podcast, I've done a number of Message from the Deep episodes, which I generally wait until I feel like I really understand a game to offer those. But I really enjoy trying new things. A big part of my enjoyment of the hobby is trying out new games. Obviously, I've tried 95 new games this year. You don't do that if that's not a thing you enjoy. So that said, obviously I don't think I need to master a game to enjoy it. This is a problem we struggle with in the games that my partner and I design. We tend to design games that are not easy to understand on the first play. Often games where you have to play it the first time, and then at the end of that first play, then you kind of understand how it works, which is that is a big ask. There's a lot of people who, if they don't like it on the first play, they're done. And so our game has to give enough delight in that first play that you want to come back for a second. Let's see. Looking for a medium to heavy, yet streamlined game. That is a tricky ask. That's a thread I kind of want to go look at, because I really have no idea what people might put there as a response. Medium to heavy. So medium to heavy is generally about weight, and weight is usually some combination of depth and complexity. I did a whole series about depth versus complexity on this podcast sometime this year. Feel free to go back and look at it. Search depth versus complexity and you'll find a 3-part series. Generally, I find that when games have a heavy weight, I usually use heavy to describe I use heavy and light to describe both depth and complexity. So when this person says medium to heavy, I'm assuming they want something in the middle of the road, but then they want light complexity. So they should listen to my podcast in which I go with light complexity, medium to heavy depth. And I don't recall what games I said for that. Well, like the chess is probably up there. That's very deep, but relatively light complexity. Probably some of those symbolic abstracts in the neighborhood of chess would fit that question. All right, let's see. Best Kallax dimensions for board games. Ticket to Ride box. I'm not seeing a lot of this is depressing. I need needs more interaction versus I don't enjoy conflict. In fact, I avoid it. So this is a thing from the design forum in which somebody is complaining about how these are often two contradictory results that you get from playtesters. Needs more interaction versus I don't enjoy conflict. Now, it's possible this person is posting about hearing both those comments from the same person. Needs more interaction, but I don't enjoy conflict is a challenging thing to say if you like both. I don't know. It is a tricky thing to have a game that has very much interaction but not conflict, unless it's a co-op game, and presumably they mean in a competitive game. There are always semi-co-op games, but I actually find those more competitive, or competitive in a frustrating way, versus straight-up competitive games. You could have something like Sidereal Confluence, which is a game I keep hearing about but haven't had a chance to play, in which you are trying out these different strategies, but you don't really know which ones you're going to get to use. Let's see. Is Mintworks smaller than Love Letter? They're about the same size. Mintworks fits in an Altoid size tin, and Love Letter fits in a small bag. I think the tin would fit in the bag, so by that argument, Love Letter's bigger. Unless this person's talking about gameplay, in which case Mintworks certainly is bigger. I haven't even played it. I just, pay attention to people talking about it. All right. I'm not seeing a lot of questions. Come on, people. it'd be nice if there were some questions. If you were an instrument of communication, what would you be? An instrument of communication? I don't even know what that means. I would say that's written by somebody who isn't a good communicator. Is that like you could be a semaphore flag? Or a Morse code device? Or an internet router? What a weird question. That's another one where I probably should, go back and follow that after we're done here. When and how to let a game go? Ooh, that's a good one. This is a consistent question here on the podcast, and I've wrestled with various ideas. One common idea I hear is that you should let a game go when you have a replacement for it, right? If you have a game that plays in a certain way, and you get another game that plays in a similar way, and you feel like the second game shuts out the first one, then you should let the first one go. I'm trying to think if that's something that's happened, if that's a reason that I've let games go from my collection. Usually not. Usually there's another reason. Often it's just not good enough. It could be a game that I kind of like, but it's not good enough. Like for me, a game, there are two channels of interest in a game based on a couple different outcomes. One of the outcomes is, does my wife enjoy the game? If my wife does not enjoy the game, then that game enters a window of competition for enjoyment or for pleasure in my gaming and my potential future gaming with people other than my wife. Which, if you follow the podcast, even when we're not in quarantine, I play several games a week with my wife. So games that she enjoys are automatically higher on the going to stay in my collection list. So the first filter is, if my wife doesn't like a game, then it definitely drops in terms of my interest in keeping it. Now, that's certainly not the only reason. There are lots of other reasons I would keep a game, but that's the first one. The second one is I generally, now that my collection's over 400 games, I generally am always in the mood that I should be getting rid of games. Now, I don't always do that, but I should be doing that. And so I think the need to have the collection get smaller rather than bigger is a crucial one, and one I should really focus on exploring more thoroughly. Coupled with that is the question of playing games that I haven't played yet. That's something I should be doing. This person's at how and when to let a game go. So first thing would be, is it a game you play? If you don't play it often, when do you think you'll play it next? If you don't have an answer to that, the third column is, why are you keeping it? So I have a few games, like some Martin Wallace games that I've only played once maybe, and I don't see myself playing them very often. The Mythotopia is a good example. That's a game I like. I never bust it out. So that's a game that, why do I keep it? In part because I have a robust Martin Wallace collection. So that one I am accepting and nodding to the fact that I am a board game collector, and that for me, having a breadth of Martin Wallace games is really interesting because it helps me see the arc of his career, particularly those games, A Study in Emerald, A Few Acres of Snow, A Handful of Stars, and Mythotopia are all sort of very similar. And so sort of seeing how Wallace evolved his gameplay of that, his production of that style of game is really interesting to me. Why else would you let a game go? That's the main thing. The other reason is you could take a more aggressive approach with your collection, something like Alex from Board Game Co., which is a game that's sitting on your shelf not getting played, is unused potential. You could let it go, get money for it, and then the game that you get in return is better. Okay, let's see. Medium heavy deck builder that works well at 2 players. This is a good one. I like deck building games, lots of them. I don't know what a medium heavy deck builder is. I don't generally think of deck builders as being heavy unless you're using the deck building to do something else. A good example would be the Martin Wallace games I've just mentioned. I would call A Few Acres of Snow a medium heavy deck builder because you're trying to manage the movement of pieces on the board, you're playing your cards, you're building your deck by buying things. That seems really interesting to me. If this person's looking for a more conventional deck building experience, I would say Valley of Kings is great, but I don't know how good that is at 2. I've only played it a couple times and not at 2. So I guess I don't have a good answer for that one. But I'm interested to listeners, what do you think a medium heavy deck builder is? It's a weird one. How do I find a publisher for a CCG/TCG? This is one I actually responded to. The person who is making the game is making a collectible card game / trading card game, which I think is a dumb move. And I'm maybe becoming an old crank on Board Game Geek, but anytime someone posts about working on a CCG or TCG, I reply and say, don't do that. And I send them the link to the excellent article by James Matthey explaining why it's a bad idea to make a CCG or TCG. Now, about a third of the time, people are just using that phrase to describe a card battling game where you have a deck of cards and your opponent has a deck of cards and you battle each other. That's not a CCG, of course. CCG is a collectible card game, or TCG is trading card game. So if you aren't making it randomized distribution and collectible because some cards are rare, it's not a collectible card game or trading card game because you have no reason to collect or trade them. It's something else. But yeah, don't make those. Nobody wants to buy them. There are a couple that are very popular, but getting people into a new one is extremely hard and nobody wants to buy those. Let's see. Vintage games that don't suck? ? That's an interesting one. Curious, what games would you call vintage that don't suck? Acquire is certainly an old game that I like, reviewed within the last 6 months here on the podcast. Is a vintage game anything older than, say, 2010? No, I mean, you couldn't call Pandemic vintage, so maybe it's anything older than 1995. Anything older than Catan is maybe vintage, in which case I have two answers. Acquire and Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. That's two vintage games that don't suck. I would also say Cosmic Encounter is great, although the only version of that I've played is the mid-2000s reprint from Fantasy Flight, so I don't know what it's like in its oldest form, but it's great. I've heard good things about Escape from Colditz. It's a little creaky, apparently, but still fun. Vintage games. Sleuth is supposed to be very good. Haven't played that one myself. I think Boggle is fun. Scrabble is fun. If you like word games, those are classics. In fact, mainstream classics. There's a reason that people keep buying them. Although, that's not a good argument because people keep buying Sorry and Trouble, and those aren't great. Although Trouble at least has choices to make. There are some games where you literally don't have any choices at all, or have very, very few. So there's my advice. All right, let's hop onto the third thread just for a minute to see what's what here. New to buying on Kickstarter. Help. Advice appreciated. Well, first off, you're not buying on Kickstarter, you're backing. It's important to use a different verb because when you are backing on Kickstarter, you're saying, I want this project to happen. I can't wait for it to happen, but I understand it is a work in progress. It is not a complete work. I'm not pre-ordering. I am backing. It's important to keep that mindset. Second, it's important to do your research. How many games has this company produced? Did they follow through on producing those games? Were they responsive to people asking questions and helpful? These are all really important because you are giving them your money and hoping that they will give you a thing. I always look to see if a game has a rule book available. Does it have reviews from a couple people? Does the gameplay look interesting? Ideally, they have an example of the gameplay that you can watch. You can get an idea of how the game works. Reviews are good, but generally with most Kickstarters now, the reviews are a paid process. It's a preview, so that's not as good. As a designer you've heard before, that's always a good thing. A designer you've heard of and you like their work. Like seeing that a game is designed by Richard Launius, for instance, is not a selling point for me. It's not a negative. I've played a few of his games that I enjoy, but most of the time, actually, it would be a negative. Or Kevin Wilson is a similar figure. I mean, I know he's a great game designer, but the style of game he makes generally doesn't fit my taste. And so seeing that's a new Kevin Wilson game is not going to make me jump off the shelf. But, a Vladimir Suchy game, absolutely. I will buy that any day. Then be patient. Don't be an entitled jerk, which a lot of the people who go into the Kickstarter comments are jerks. My preferred way to handle Kickstarters is back them and then forget them. I said it and forget it. Back them, then forget them. Pay attention to the emails. I read the updates when the company sends an email, but that's it. I don't participate in the comments. Make sure that you fill out the backer kit email as soon as you can. That helps the creators. And then when the game shows up, it shows up and you got a game. It's great. The more time you spend and energy you spend focusing on when you'll get the game, I think that's counterproductive. I haven't found that to be a productive way to engage with those. Well, it is now the end of the podcast. I've returned to my home and I am ready to begin my discussion of schoolwork with myself rather than talking about board games with you. So in that regard, if you'd like to join the conversation, answer any of these questions for yourself, or ask any of me, you can do so over on Board Game Geek and Guild 3269. There's a link to that guild in the show notes if you can't find it easily. Or you can email me, brendan@rattleboxgames.com. I'd love to hear from you and interact with you. Thanks for listening to the show. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.